Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inspire Speaker Series, GPA's long-running series designed to inspire and motivate citizens and leaders to think bigger and bolder about what is possible. We all know that sometimes the most important conversations are the hardest ones to be had, but that doesn't mean that they should be avoided. So in 2024, we're inviting audiences to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable through a series of topics and discussions that will pull us just far enough outside of our comfort zones and provide us with the tools necessary to carry on these conversations in ways that challenge our thinking and catalyze change. My name is Destiny Knetzer. I'm the Director of Education and Events at Green Building Alliance, and today we're unpacking ways we can successfully talk about climate change. No matter what lens you're looking through, if we want to find common solutions to common problems, sustainability and climate are topics that we must be able to think critically and speak productively about despite what differences there may be. Today, we'll be talking with Dr. Richard Alley. Dr. Richard Alley is a professor of geosciences at Penn State University with research focusing on the study of ice cores, glaciology, sea level changes, and abrupt climate change. He's the author of the book Earth, the Operator's Manual, and host of the accompanying PBS TV miniseries exploring energy and the climate crisis. Dr. Alley has advised government officials from both major political parties, participated in the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whose members shared the honor of receiving the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize along with former Vice President Al Gore, and in 2001 was the recipient of the Stephen Scheider Award for Outstanding Climate Communication. Richard, thank you for joining us, and I'm excited to dig into this topic with you today. Well, Richard, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to dig into this topic with you. So my first question is, in the PBS series, Earth, the Operator's Manual, you introduce yourself as a Republican and a climate scientist, and that's not really something that we hear a lot. So how do you connect the dots for people who are maybe confused or surprised by the combination of those two identities?
So climate change should not be political, in my opinion. It's real. The basic understanding that if we burn fossil fuels, it releases CO2 and that changes the climate was established in the 1800s. It's a predictive science. There's nothing in this that's even vaguely political yet. It's just physics, and it's completely incontrovertible physics. It is. Beyond that, where do you go with it? What do you do? What policies you make? Should you make government regulations, or should you incentivize the private sector? But that's, for now, way far away from where the argument, unfortunately, seems to have settled. And so in a world where we were using our knowledge wisely, we would be to the point of that kind of question. Do you incentivize the private sector or make government regulations?
I actually just attended a conference last week where we were talking about the intersectionality of climate change and how, at least in Pittsburgh and in our general region, our private sector is doing very well at recognizing like the good business sense of, the sustainability, and how the private sector is kind of operating as like an example for governance and the rest of the community. So we're very proud of that here.
It's wonderful. I spend some amount of my time talking to people around this. And I have a slide that I love to show if I'm giving a talk, which says, if we use our knowledge, we get a bigger economy. We have more people with jobs. We are healthier. Our nation is more secure. The environment is cleaner, and we're better with the golden rule. And right now, the economy and the employment and the health and the national security and the environment and the ethics are all in the same direction. We're not doing enough now to help any of them. And so that's public, it's private, it's public-private partnerships, it's employment. At anywhere you start, the using our knowledge wisely is good for us.
Absolutely. What drew you to be interested in climate change specifically? Walk me through your personal journey or evolution of thought as far as, climate change is concerned.
Yeah, well, we growing up, we weren't the richest people on earth, but somebody has to make the top half possible. But my parents really loved education, and they were convinced we had to become educated. And so they tried things, and they got us to Yellowstone. And I came back, I'm going to be a geologist. This is the future. I was in the first suburb north of Columbus, Ohio. I could get to Ohio State. I could afford Ohio State. They had a good geology program. I needed a summer job. And there was one helping the glaciologist, whatever that meant. So I took the job helping the glaciologist, and I got to do all kinds of amazing things, including going to Antarctica 1/4 of my sophomore year, which is just a fantastic experience. And I was working on the physical side of ice. What is ice? What can you learn about ice? How does ice flow? What is it doing? What's the history of ice? But this got me into ice cores, and the ice cores are I wrote a book called The 2 Mile Time Machine. An ice core is this giant pile of old snow squeezed to ice under the weight of more snow. And it has something that blew through the air is in the ice. There is air in the ice, trapped bubbles. There are indicators of past temperature, of causes of change of past temperature. I counted annual layers. Huge amount of science to know that they are annual layers, but we counted more than 100,000 in an ice core from central Greenland. And so now I'm a climate scientist. And it's a very long, wonderful, complicated, fun story to get from climate can change for lots and lots and lots of reasons to, but the biggest reason is changing CO2. And the history of Earth's climate is so rich and so nuanced and so varied. But the biggest control knob has been CO2. And we've grabbed the biggest control knob on Earth's climate and we're cranking it. And yeah, if the sun changed a lot, it would be the biggest one, but it doesn't change much. And so you work through all of these things and you fall out the bottom. As I started as a geologist, and then I was interested in craziness and can I find something that anyone missed? And wow, wow, wow. And oh, it's CO2.
So, why do you think maybe that there is such a distrust in the scientific community, especially as it comes to conclusions about climate change?
So I actually think most people in the world actually do accept the science. If you look at the polling, it's pretty heavily accepting. There's something like 10 to 15% who really reject it, and some more who are a little uncertain. Some of this just comes from the times. There's people will disagree with almost anything now. We're back to arguing with flat earthers, and they really are out there now. So we can find disagreement with almost anything. I think this one is hard because it is really true that our well-being right now depends in important ways on fossil fuels. The amount of energy we get from fossil fuels and the good things we do with that energy. So right now, we really do rely on fossil fuels in really important ways, and people know this. There is plenty of evidence that there really is scholarship now showing that money has been spent on confusing things from people who probably did know better.
I like what you said about people are having trouble, perhaps, with the idea of switching over to renewables and things like that because of our dependence on the current energy source now. So I think that kind of feeds into my next question a little bit, which is why people have trouble or difficulty maybe talking about climate change or the ways that we would address it. And I think fear is a big part of that. But, what other obstacles do you think there are in the way of climate change conversation?
The Yale Climate Communications folks do polling of what the people in the US think about climate change. And the polling shows clearly that the average person in the US does agree with the scientific consensus. They usually show this as maps And the places with very low density of people, not many people living there, tend to be more skeptical of the climate change science than the people in concentrated places. So you look at the map and you might first think that the average person is doubtful, but they're not. If you count people as opposed to area, the average person is well on board. But there is this 10 or 15% that are not. But it's very interesting when you go across the questions that are asked and what people in the US say is climate changing? Yes. Are we causing it? Yes. Should we be looking for solutions? Yes, 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 yes. We're on board. We want this. Are you talking about it? No. And there's only a couple of counties in the United States where the average person says they have talked about this topic. And so we know that's what's out there. I tend to think that this is the Uncle Ed effect. And so if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you say, how about that climate change? And Uncle Ed is one of the 15 or 10% and says, oh, it's an evil plot to take away my pickup truck. And you say, it's okay, Ed. Just calm down, pass the potatoes, and how about the Steelers? And so I think that this small number of really, really, really loud voices who have worked very, very hard to polarize the discussion have almost completely short-circuited our ability to talk about it, and getting past the very small number of very loud voices is the hardest part of it. And it doesn't have to be Uncle Ed. It could be Aunt Edna.
So, what are some successful strategies that you found when talking about climate change, especially, for different audiences, like students versus politicians versus Uncle Ed, as you said?
Because right now, honestly, money and safety and health and the future are in the same direction, which is learning to use our knowledge with appreciation for where we came from to build a better future. That if you can find what people are interested in, you can generally start there to build onto it. And there are people who are engineers, physicists who haven't looked at this history of how we understand climate change, and they might actually really be concerned about whether the physics are right. And so with them, I would start there. But there are people who are really concerned about their jobs. And I can tell long stories about how if they really want jobs, they should be looking now at how we build a sustainable future, because of this result that the sustainable future will have more jobs and energy. And that's something that's surprising to people. Ages ago, our younger daughter, who's now a professor, did a History Day film in middle school on surface mining, strip mining. And we spent one of the most fascinating days I've ever spent in my life getting tours of strip mines and related areas. And eventually, my wife and I and the two daughters ended up in the cab of a drag line that was taking apart a mountain. And there's a guy sitting there with two joysticks taking apart a mountain and talking to us at the same time. And Karen's filming, this was really great. And the guy doing the work, there used to be a huge number of jobs here down in the hole, really bad jobs. And he said, now there's 4 of us run this 24/7. And there's somebody sets the dynamite, and there's somebody that greases it, and there's a few folks that drive trucks, and that's it. We're going to take apart a mountain with that many people. And I was at a meeting. I was talking to a guy that was mining copper in Chile from Illinois, because he ran the self-driving trucks. And in this copper mine in Chile, the pickup truck would go down into the mine in the morning, driven by a human, followed by all these humongous self-driving trucks. And there's no one in them. And then the rest of the day, the self-driving trucks just drove themselves. And the self-driving trucks were so fantastically good at doing what they were told that they were making big ruts in the road. So they had to program a dither into their driving so that they didn't make the big ruts. If there had really been money in these coal mines, you probably see the people driving the trucks lose their business, their jobs too. And so it's just this little tiny number of jobs. They happen to be really important. They're jobs for people who have mortgages and houses, and the town really relies on that as sort of the last thing there. But if it's done right, the opportunities for them and for their children and their grandchildren will be much better in a different world, and one that's sustainable.
I had a conversation with a few colleagues last week about how renewable energy and the workforce development in that sector is opening up a lot more blue collar opportunities, and people are seeing hope to rejoin the middle class again because there's opportunities directly out of high school or to do apprenticeships right away, and not having to attend college, and college is not the go-to option anymore. You can be a part of the working force again and still have a substantial life, and be able to provide for your family in a sustainable way as well.
Fantastic opportunities. And you can get a machine to do the self-driving truck, but the people who put the solar cells on our roof here had to know what they're doing. They got paid pretty well. And that is very, very hard to automate because our roof is different than the neighbor's roof, which is different than the neighbor's roof.
So, what story or piece of evidence do you typically present to people that you feel is the most persuasive or the most impactful?
So it depends on who the person is and what they're really interested in. I sometimes refer people to a little set of clips out of this PBS miniseries that we made, that the interviews with the Texas ranchers, and they were in trouble. The economics of being a Texas rancher were not good. The town was in trouble. The high school was in trouble. The ranch was in trouble. They put in a wind farm. They call it mailbox money. They go out to the mailbox and they get money, and they save 5% of the ranch goes into wind. 95% is still ranch, but a lot of them are making more money off the wind than they are off the ranch. The high school saved, the town saved, the ranch is saved. And this is a huge American success story. This is our know-how, taking double crops. You put this over what you were doing. You keep doing what you were doing, but you just bring in another thread of income that can help you get past the tax bills and keep your family farm intact. The opportunities there are pretty amazing. Some of that we have not yet done a lot of in Pennsylvania. You could have this question of why we have here at home solar on our roof, but we don't have solar in the local dairy farm doing community solar.
Can you tell me about a specific time, like a light bulb moment that you saw it really click for somebody? That climate change was a thing, and that moving away from being an obstacle and being an ally.
I mean, in some sense, this is sort of my job, or I teach, and I get this opportunity to have students come up and chat with me afterwards. And the first class, the student comes up and is really, oh, I'm not so sure about that. And the next class, oh, well, I read what, that's interesting. And then I'm going to go into engineering, and I'm doing solar. So I have had the opportunity to have a lot of chats with students who sort of, you can see them at some point saying, I decided to change my major. I've decided to change the direction I'm going. I'm looking for my first job in sustainable things because that's where I think the future is going to be. So this is way easier for me than most people because I get to work with students, and they're at that point where they really are looking for the best thing.
Yeah, I bet you have a lot of really good, like I said, light bulb moments teaching every day.
I'm lucky, like
So a little bit more about you being an educator and a speaker. How do you navigate conversations in classrooms or just any space in general where there's probably so many different varying opinions all sharing one space?
a lot of it, I think, is starting from a position of respect, and that's easy for me because I really do respect the viewpoints, and I get it about how good fossil fuels are. My stock talk on this, I walk through sort of the history of the good we've gotten out of the fossil fuels. You know, before we were deeply enough into oil, before the Drake well here in Pennsylvania, we have 1 million deer in the state now, more or less. We might have had a few, there might not have been any. The elk are re-imported from the Rocky Mountains. We imported some turkeys. The bears sort of wandered back in, but we still don't have any lions. But we got rid of all of them. Why do we have Groundhog Day and not Ground Bear Day or something like that? The Germans often used bears, but we didn't have anything bigger than a groundhog to use. And we just cleaned them out, and we got back trees, and we quit burning whales, and we started burning kerosene, and we allowed the whales and the trees to grow back because we went to fossil fuels. And so you start with a respect for how we got here, and from that then move to, we can do this again. We can build a better system, and that the still better system is going to be cheaper and cleaner and more equitable and more jobs and so on, healthier and what have you. So I think it's starting from respect, and then building to the future.
So you mentioned, the transition of energy sources from whales to kerosene. So we've clearly gone through, energy transitions before. Do you think that, the pushback from transitioning to fossil fuels to renewables is any worse than it maybe was in the past, about the same? And why do you think there might be so much pushback?
Right. So I think the biggest difficulty we face now might be this difference between what it takes to pay the workers who make the oil and what the people who control the oil are receiving. The World Bank calls this oil rent, and it's more than 1% of the world economy. It's close to 1% of the US economy. In certain countries, it's more than half of their economy, a few of them. And so this money that people receive, not because they worked hard to make the resource useful to you, but because they control the resource, and that they can use it to influence the public discussion, the political discussion, in ways that help them to keep controlling it. Maybe it's certainly one of the biggest barriers to getting to the next one, because fossil fuels are such a very large source of this money that doesn't have to be paid back out to the workers.
How do you know when not to talk about climate change? How can you identify a situation of like, okay, this particular, conversation is a lost cause, or, maybe it's just not the most appropriate time for that conversation?
Yeah, I wish you could tell me that. I honestly, this one is a very difficult one to get to, because this is the Uncle Ed problem. If you have somebody that is ready to scream, ready to yell, ready to take it to the mat, you don't gain anything by having an argument there. In a lot of ways, we actually do sort of know that having that argument, having the debate, having legitimizes Uncle Ed. The audience hears two people arguing different sides, and they say, well, that must mean the truth is between them and both sides are valid. And so you can't get forward when that is there. But that is very clearly keeping us from having the discussion, because the people who are very vocal about rejecting the science have much louder voices overall than the average person who would like to figure out how to use the science to get forward. So finding the way past these loud voices who sort of figure that delaying the action, delaying the adaptation, delaying the new world is a win for them. Delay keeps us with the system we have. And so how to move past this is, how do we generate the situations, the places, the communicators, the voices that can move us into the solution space? Very clearly, this takes a very broad range of communicators. Whoever you are and whoever I am, in the modern world, there are people who will listen to you and not me, And there are other people who will listen to me and not you. And so this particular issue that we often now sort of choose who our sources are means that we need a very broad range of sources.
So, do you think it's ever okay to have conversations about solutions for climate change without necessarily addressing climate change? Like, how do you change the language in conversations to meet people where they are and talk about the problems in terms that they care about?
Yeah. So I do think it's fine to start where people are. It's as long as we keep it honest, I'm never going to start the discussion by saying, yeah, I'm with you, you can ignore climate change. But if they really want to start on the energy system, that's perfectly fine. We can worry about getting to climate change later. At this point, because the advantages of moving towards a sustainable energy system are so huge and so broad, you don't have to start it at climate change. Eventually, it will come in. And at the point where you say, okay, so just how much is the economic benefit of getting off of fossil fuels? It comes in there. But just the health benefits are sufficient to justify making the move. And in fact, in many of the economic analyses, they turn out to be the biggest one. So, so it's pretty easy to say, let's start where people are. Keep it honest, no question about that. But start where they are, and then we'll get to the full picture later as need be.
So, are you yourself optimistic about climate goals and progress towards climate mitigation and adaptation? What specifically gives you hope?
So the most hopeful piece of this is that we can build this sustainable energy system. And in doing so, we can lower the price of energy on the margin right now. So if you want to add a little bit of electricity to the grid, the International Energy Agency said in 2020 that the best renewable schemes now are the cheapest electricity in human history. Cheapest electricity in human history. In particular, we're talking about solar, but solar and wind are both there now for a whole lot of places. We were not ever going to drive down the cost of fossil fuels so extremely that everyone in the world could have as much energy as we're using in the US and that they could have it for the long term. When the Drake well was drilled where 1859, it's drilled where native people have been using oil for thousands of years, where it leaks out of the ground and you didn't even need a well. And Drake's more or less says, well, look, if oil leaks out of the ground, maybe there's oil in the ground. Now, what do? An oil platform in the deep water of the Gulf could be billions of dollars. And so it's getting harder to get fossil fuels. They're not being driven down in price. It's not likely that they would be. It's cheaper now to add renewables to the grid without any subsidy for the renewables. And so we can think of a world where everybody has energy and lots of energy. Climate change is going to cause droughts and floods and all sorts of problems. But with a lot of energy, we can think about adapting to that. We can think about fixing things. If you build enough renewable energy, you can think about desalinating the ocean and pumping the water and watering the desert and feeding people. So the opportunities that become available by driving down the cost of the energy so much that everybody can have a lot is, I think, the most optimistic piece, because we do have this huge history. I tell stories of how we have fought each other, how we have had stress over the energy shortages in the past. There's this wonderful story. So if this is Cape Cod, this is First Encounter Beach in Eastham is right there. And that's where the pilgrims first meet the native people. And they say the Cape Cod was so goodly a land and wooded to the brink of the sea. In the late 1600s, that town of Eastham on Cape Cod outlawed your own ability to cut your own tree on your own property. Deforestation had become so extreme. They were so short of fuel, they didn't know what to do. Government got in people's faces. Over on Manhattan, they were hiring people to make sure that a cord of wood was really a cord of wood. You got what you paid for. Thoreau walks Cape Cod in 1855, and he says many of the people get all of their fuel from the beach. So there's nothing to burn. They don't know what to do. If there's a shipwreck, you can burn that. If there's a log drifts over from logging in Maine, you can burn that. And otherwise, you can't cook dinner, right? It's just flabbergasting. And the idea that now we can become energy rich and that everybody could become energy rich and that will not only help in so many ways, but it gets rid of a lot of tension at borders, a lot of tension about who controls which resource, a lot of tension for a whole bunch of things. That's an optimistic.
In your opinion, what is the pathway to our most sustainable future?
I tend to think that we double down on farming energy, on wind and sun, and then we keep very, very open minds about what else might be coming down the road that could be added to it. And I know if certain things happened, so if we got fusion, maybe that would be part of the link. If we got space solar, maybe that will be part of it. But right now, the ones that are shovel ready, that are cheaper than anything else, are on the surface here and building renewables. And then I continue to be very intrigued by the possibility that we'll use hot, dry rock for geothermal. So geothermal, as you know, is two very different things. One of them is heat pumps and using the earth as a heat exchanger. And that's just a fantastically efficient way to save money for people as you build houses. But the other one is you could use hot rock, take the oil well drilling rigs and upgrade them and drill deep and pump cold water down. It comes up hot, it spins a turbine, it makes electricity, and that doesn't die or set. It's just there. And so it's conceivable that eventually, rather than storage, you'd end up with geothermal. I don't know that. But right now, wind and sun and wind and sun, I show a picture of the area that's needed of the earth to supply all human energy use plus from solar cells. And it's this little pink square out in the Sahara or wherever you put it. The area we use, we grow food and we eat it, and we grow food and we feed it to animals and we eat them or we milk them. And we grow food and we burn it. And across the world, we have biofuels, food that we burn. The area that we use to grow food that we burn would come pretty close to supplying all human energy. Everything we get from oil and coal and gas and nuclear and everything else, if we put modern solar on it, which is just flabbergasting. That's the kind of number. You start thinking agrivoltaics. A lot of crops like full sun, but some of them like a little shade. So if you let the farmer get extra money by putting solar over something that likes shade, just a little bit of our agricultural land is all human energy use.
So at COP28, there was a lot of debate between new versus now, and the trade-off of using what we have as it is right now versus waiting for new technologies. Is it more beneficial to get the impact right away rather than miss it, or is it more beneficial to wait for the better technology that will serve us longer? Is there a right or wrong answer to that? Somewhere in the middle?
Someone said, "Oh, we're going to have fusion." We were just about to have fusion when I was in high school. I graduated in 1976, and it was just about there. The joke is that it's the energy. It's always been the energy of the future, and it always will be. Waiting for that is absurd. You're talking decades before there's really commercially available if we get it there. If later down the road we can add that and it's economically viable and we think that's a good idea, then we could look at doing that. But that's such a long-term thing that I just don't see it happening. There's a number of other things that float through this discussion that I would put in a similar position. And I know I could get in trouble with some of the people who think we're just about to have fission, but when I was in high school, I was a big fan of fission. We're going to have nukes and it's going to be dirt cheap, but its price has gone up. It's not even vaguely competitive. And I know people will tell me 42 reasons why it should be competitive if we just had the right policies. But my entire life, the price has gone up because we have failed to put in place those policies. And the idea that we will put in place those policies, we will get people on board, we will build huge amounts, we will put them on the grid, we will solve how to integrate them with other things, and they will make a big difference in the next 10 or 20 years. I've been waiting 50 years for it and it hasn't happened yet. So I tend to think that at this point, we know things that are shovel ready, things that can be done very rapidly. And because they pay, because they are cheaper now without subsidy than the alternatives, waiting for something that's going to be even cheaper, maybe in 20 or 30 years, is probably not the way to go. If we were paying a huge overage to put in place things now, then it might be a different question, but it's the cheapest electricity in human history.
So, for the science nerds out there, because I studied environmental science for a little while, so I'm very interested in this just myself. What is the most interesting or possibly the most irrefutable piece of evidence that you've come across in your research that climate change is real, but not only is it real, it is human impacted?
I suppose it's not from my research, but it is this understanding of radiative transfer in the atmosphere that came out of ultimately Fourier and Eunice Foote and Tyndall and Arrhenius and the Air Force, and the fact that there's just no possible way we can get past this. It has to warm. My research has involved one line of testing that understanding. So once that understanding was in place, they tested it by designing sensors for heat-seeking missiles. They tested it by predicting what the satellites would measure and looking at how the signal changed over time. It's been tested in so many ways. Ours has been looking at the history and going back and saying, so climate has always changed. And that proves that climate is changeable. And climate change has always affected living things, which proves that it's important. And climate has changed for so many different reasons, but especially because of CO2. And then there's this long set of arguments that show the change happening now is us. It's not natural that we could rival the biggest things that the Earth has done in 4 billion years, and we could be faster than almost any of them. So it's a very I am teaching this class right now, and we spent an entire semester trying to take that last minute and put it into a form that is justified, but it is.
So I have one final question for you today. If you had to pack and distribute a toolkit per se to have folks take with them and have conversations effectively about climate change and talk about climate change in a meaningful way, what would you pack in that kit and why?
I don't know. You know, I suppose I just start with the one thing that in responding effectively to this, we get a bigger economy with more jobs. I've worked with military leaders, and our military leaders have said if we want safe borders, if we want the homeland to be secure, we have to get actionable agreements on stopping climate change. And so some of these surprising things is probably where I'd start. In the TV shows, we relied very heavily on statements of a rear admiral in his dress whites, and we're friends now. But you know, he's a trained meteorologist. He's a brilliant person, but he's also a rear admiral, and he has it. He understands it, and his testimony is better than mine.
Well, thank you again, Richard, for joining me today on Inspire Speaker Series. I think our audience will find, this conversation to be very thought-provoking and hopefully inspiring, as the name suggests. Do you have any final thoughts or questions that you want to share before we say goodbye?
Well, I want to thank you and the Green Building Alliance. You're working really hard on doing important things there, and so thank you for your efforts. Thanks to your viewers, because we really can build a better future. You're helping do it, so thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Richard Alley, for joining us on Inspire Speaker Series today and providing us with some insight into how to effectively talk about climate change. Hopefully, if you're tuning in, you found today's conversation to be thought-provoking and inspiring. I want to encourage our audience now to take these tools and strategies out into the world and to continue to have these difficult but very important conversations in your communities and in your networks. We hope you'll take the time to share today's conversation and subscribe to our channel to hear more similar conversations as a part of the Inspire Speaker Series. Other ways you can continue to engage with Green Building Alliance and the Inspire Speaker Series include subscribing to our newsletter, following us on social media, or by visiting our website, gba.org. Thank you for joining us today.